Mitch, as we get underway here, first week of fall practice, um, I guess what has been your general? I don't know that you have takeaways at this point yet, but what are some of the things that you're keeping or wanting to keep the closest eye on throughout fall camp?
I just went out on Monday on the practice field when we had a few minutes to watch and had some players and position groups in mind that I was hoping to check out. I wanted to see the new punter, wanted to take a look at the running backs and see what that group looked like with the depth that they're trying to build. I wanted to see the defensive line, and they were just standing around like at the moment we were out there. I shouldn't say they were standing around. They weren't doing anything that allowed me to get much of a sense of of the group. Like it wasn't an enlightening drill that we got to see. If there had been an entire practice session, and there will be on Saturday to observe, that would have been much better when it came to the D line. Looked at the offensive line, so I'm not I didn't have any great agenda. Like, all right, I'm at the start of preseason camp. I'm gonna be able to diagnose this team in a day or a week. Just came back from Big Ten media days and was interested there to kind of catch the vibe of what this team's personality might be, and I think that's just more of the same here in week one. I thought Matt Rhule was really it was really good with his insight that he provided and kind of the confidence that he has in this team, both in Las Vegas and on Monday in Lincoln.
Mitch, when you were at practice, just kind of viewing what was going on the field, I'm curious your thoughts on some of the assistant coaches and how they
Mm-hmm.
maybe had some, I don't want to say like different types of coaching or styles of coaching from what you had seen before, but especially with where Dana Holgorsen was maybe on the practice field comparative to where his offensive assistants were. What was that dynamic like? Did you see him more hands-on, or was it really the assistants that kind of took over?
I wish I could say I had more to give you on this. Like I didn't even see Dana out there, and there was a period of time where I was looking for him because I was curious, Austin, in the same answer that you were looking for from me. Like, what's he doing? Where's he at? And I was looking around at I think he was back behind the quarterbacks, but like I was standing in the middle. So on one side of me was the turf, and on the other side was the grass, and it's a lot of space, and you got 115 players, 120 players out there. I saw Donovan Raiola working. I saw Ron Brown and EJ Barthel. I saw Rob Dvorak. I saw John Butler, but I didn't even see Dana. So I wish, like I said, that again going into Saturday, like that's something where you have more time to watch, and we had 15, 20 minutes, and hopefully I can go around and kind of get eyeballs on really all the things that you would want in the first week of camp.
Mitch, we've been talking a lot about kind of positional groups and units and strength and weaknesses of the team kind of throughout the last week or so here. And I'm curious, we were talking to Shafe on Tuesday, and he was going through the places that he thought were better off than they were last year in terms of the different units. And I kind of flipped it on him, and I'll do the same to you here. Is there a unit that you think has taken a step back from last year?
Well, because of the experience factor, I mean, I look first at the defensive line. They had Ty Robinson and Nash Hutmaker a year ago, and it was very clear who was leading the group and how they lined up, and I mean how they lined up to run drills, and like who set the tone. And they're still trying to figure that out. I think they're still feeling through that at the moment. You heard Cam Lenhart talking about Riley Van Poppel and Elijah Judy, and like Cam is a leader in that group, but there's still a feeling out process. I'd start with that group. Maybe go to the running backs too. Now, how it panned out for Nebraska last season at the running back spot because of some injuries, and they didn't. I don't know if they got as much out of that out of that group as they thought they were going to heading into the season. It kind of became Emmett Johnson's show late in the year. I think there's less room to miss at the running back spot this year than there was in entering 2024. They had some safety valves that they had to tap into last year, and right now, maybe you have that, but you just don't know because there's not really any experience at all behind Emmett.
Mitch, when you look at the team's depth across really the entire roster and maybe even specific position groups like Ravi was just asking, just going through kind of the offseason, where the additions have been, how we feel about certain players' development, does it feel like there's not as large of a gap between the starters and backups or projected starters and where maybe their depth pieces would be as we've maybe seen in recent years? It at least feels to me like that gap has shortened up at least a little bit.
I feel that way about the O-line, about the secondary, about the wide receivers, arguably. Trying to think of how I viewed that group a year ago. Certainly by the end of the season, in comparison to right now, I feel that way about the wide receivers and probably the linebackers too. You know, I think like a jack linebacker, for instance, to pick out a specific position, they haven't had depth at that spot. You know, whether they called it the jack or it was just an outside backer in previous seasons. Their depth there is great. I think they can play multiple players at the same time if they want to. And so, yeah, I mean, at more position groups than not at tight end, I think the depth is strong going into the year. The more positions than not, they are deeper across the board than at this time last year.
Mitch, if I gave you one spot where I could say, hey, I can guarantee you a B+ grade for the season, whatever that equates to in your head, where would you put that B+ on? Like what group, or even an individual player or position? I'll leave that up to you. Where would you say, like, hey, that's where I want that B+, just so I know that's what I've got?
I really like the combo that Nebraska has at that jack spot with Willis McGahee and Dasan McCullough, and I think there's some other young players who will get fine time on the field this year and start to earn some quality reps as they get into September and October. That's a really strong position. So I'll go there. And Phil Simpson coaching it now. They have an experienced coach there and who can help advance that progress. Like the addition of McCullough coming over from Oklahoma in the offseason and the growth of McGahee, like those two things together, I think bode very well for what they're going to get out of that spot. I think it can be a primary pass rushing position and then also a spot that they rely on to just be able to do their job on the D line, like not miss assignments and just be very solid against the run and the pass.
Mitch, I'll stick to the defensive side. I might come back and ask you the offensive side, but on the new assistants that are a part of that defensive staff, which do you think is under more pressure to have their unit perform better? Is it the defensive backs or defensive line?
Probably the D line. I mean, they go hand in hand. You need to have a good D line in order to have a secondary that performs. So for me to pick one and say like, oh, the D line's under more pressure, and then I think, okay, well, what if the secondary, falls flat and they don't get good play? And then you're going to be giving up big passes. That's not good. So they like a defense. This is part of it. This is just football. Like you have to be good everywhere. You're only as good as your weakest link. And if you're not getting it done up front, like it's pretty tough to play in the secondary. Like having said all of that, I think there's more pressure on Terry Braden as a defensive line coach because I think there's less room for error. Like in the secondary, there's so many pieces, and if you have a couple of injuries or like something doesn't pan out, the thought right now I think is that you're going to be okay. And I don't know if you can say that about the defensive line. So just from the standpoint of like how much margin for error there is, I'd probably go with more pressure on the D line and Terry Braden.
Mitch, you brought up the receivers a minute ago and kind of what the gap was between them and some of the other some of the other players at that position. I guess I was a little surprised to hear you include them because at least in my perception, I feel like especially Key and Hunter have been kind of elevated, maybe just because they're new, but
Mhm.
have been sort of elevated above everyone else. I guess what's led you to believe that maybe everyone after those two is closer than maybe the perception?
Because I think the youth is really dynamic in that room. I mean, we've seen it from Ja'Cory Barney. We know what Nebraska has in him. But I think that Cortez Mills and now Jeremiah Jones coming in, and you have Quinn Clark as a redshirt freshman. Like, I think these are players that are all going to step up and make contributions this year. We've been let down by the receivers in the past at Nebraska, where you can kind of get suckered into thinking that it's going to be a good position group because of the way that the athletes look. And I think you can go to any power conference school in the country, and if you look at the receivers, you're going to be wowed. And you have to take that into account when you consider like what kind of production to expect from Nebraska, because it's just there are athletic and fast and long players who play that position all over the place. Like, it's become a featured spot at the high school level, and you seem to be able to find players who look the part every year in the portal, and then that doesn't always match up with the production. But I do think that the group that Nebraska has this year with the older players who came from the portal, and Isaiah Hunter's not older, like he's a young player for sure.
Mhm.
But he did it. He proved it at Cal last year. But with Key, and I mean, Nebraska knows what it has in Janiron Bonner. Like, people forget about him. I just think there's a lot of players there who are in a good spot to connect well with Dylan Raiola and produce this year. I'm not going to say that it's the first time I've felt that way, and like I said, I've been proven wrong before. I really thought Nebraska would get more out of Banks and Nair than it did a year ago, but I think some of that was just the like inconsistency of the offense in general, and some of it was that their own doing. But I don't get that feeling from the position group this year. Some of it also, I think, the confidence that I have in the wide receivers is because of Da'Keel Shorts. I'm just really impressed with what he brings to the table. I think he's a great fit with Dana Holgorsen, and we'll get to hear from both of those guys on Thursday. So looking forward to that.
Mitch, I asked Schaefer this yesterday. Curious your thoughts when it comes to how this receiving group can perform. You mentioned last year is a little bit more disappointing with the transfers and their overall production. Would it be more beneficial for Dylan Raiola's progression, the offense's progression, that you have a number one go-to receiver who's head and shoulders above statistically and in the game situation above the rest of the group? Or would it be more proficient to be able to see a balanced receiver group where everyone's got about the same amount of yards, touchdowns, catches, all that?
Oh, I think any quarterback. Well, I mean, there's I can see both sides to it, but I'm going to say balance. I think that the defenses in the Big Ten, unless you have a Jeremiah Smith, defenses in the Big Ten are going to find a way to shut down your number one option, especially if there's not a lot to offer beyond that player. Spreading it out and for Dylan to be able to trust in 5 or 6 weapons at that position group, like, to me, that's an easy answer. I get the value of like having a go-to guy, and you can still have a go-to guy. Like, that's not to say that just because you spread things out that your number one receiver is any less talented. I think it speaks more to if that's the way the situation unfolds, and like Nebraska has 5 players who are all within like 20 catches of each other or something like that. You don't have anybody with more than 7 or 8 touchdowns, but you got 5 guys who have 5 or more. Like, that's to me as a quarterback, I'd love that, and it doesn't take anything away from the top guy. Like, if it's a 3rd and 8 and you've got to get something like that, then the quarterback. I like a position where the quarterback still knows like who is his most reliable option. But if you have plenty of them and it diminishes the output, the numbers of the top guy a little bit, then that's fine.
Mitch, earlier DB said that he felt like the strength of this team was going to be the offensive line. When I say that to you, like, how does that strike you?
I agree. It's the group I think that has worked the hardest, that is the closest the closest, like they have the best relationships with each other. They have the position coach who's been doing this for the longest amount of time at Nebraska. I think across the board, like player by player, they have the most consistency and experience. They're also the group that has lived through the most success at the major college level. When the pieces that Nebraska added in Elijah Pritchett and Rocco Spindler, you don't have a lot of that on your roster. Players who have been in the college football playoff or competed for conference championships. So I think the offensive line has just about everything that you're looking for. Like they've got the size, they've got the experience. I think they have the strength. I think they have like the attitude, the mental state right now to enter the season. That there's depth there. Like you go to the right tackle spot where it's a little bit unsettled, and you have 3 legitimate options. So if there's an injury and they've got to have the next man up, like I think there's places to go, and you have players who have experience at multiple spots. So yeah, to me, it looks like the best position group on the team.
So, Mitch, I'm going to ask this follow-up because it seems like, and maybe I'm talking to the wrong people, it seems like there's, I don't know if it's a pessimism or a fear or a trepidation about the upcoming season and what the results are going to look like from a lot of people in at least the spheres that I'm listening to. But I would ask you this. If I told all of the Nebraska fan base, hey, going into year 3 of Matt Rhule, I can tell you confidently that the offensive line is the best unit of the team.
Mm-hmm.
How much differently do you think people would feel if I took that 30,000-foot view than when we zoom in here and are looking down the barrel of the 2025 season?
I think people would feel good about that. Like I think it means that your running game has a leg up. It means that you're going to be protecting the quarterback. I think that when the offensive line is good, I think it boosts the confidence of the entire offense. Like it's natural to look to the offensive line for guidance, for leadership, for inspiration. So if you start the season and that's the one thing that that your offensive line can lead the way, then that's a great place. That's a great place to be.
Mitch, from Big Ten Media Days a week ago to what we heard Monday, and maybe what you expect to hear through the rest of the week for fall practices, how was that messaging sounded different or maybe in a different tone than in years past under Rhule? Have you picked up on anything that maybe not necessarily just Rhule himself, but what we've heard from other players or assistants or, the sort that we have had media access to? Is there anything that you've picked on that that feels a little bit different than what we've heard the past 2 seasons?
I think it's more of the same, more of like everybody speaking the same language. I think people are more comfortable in what is the expected of this program. I don't think there's as many questions that the players have about how the coaches want them to prepare. Things are not happening that are a surprise at this point. Like you don't hear as Nebraska, like, one of the talking points every year at the start of camp under Matt Rhule has been the whole we're going into the dorms and, this is going to be a time for the team to grow. This year, it's just there. It's just part of it. And they took it a step farther with what that exercise is intended to produce. And the players said, hey, we just want to be in here without the coaches. So I think people are more natural in their in understanding what Matt Rhule and his assistant coaches want. Like they're able to get down to business more quickly because there's no longer a feeling out process that you had certainly in year 1. And I think even a fair amount last year.
Mitch, are you surprised that seems to be the case considering there was, a pretty decent amount of turnover in the staff this last year?
No, the head coach, like it starts with the head coach, and I think there's enough players and enough, even enough staff members, and I'm not just talking about the assistant coaches, but like people embedded in the program in leadership roles. And there's some people who are new in those spots too. You look at Pat Stewart, the general manager, but the ones that interact with the players most often on a daily basis, like they have the same core. Like if you come in as a player at Nebraska and it's the off season ahead of training camp, or you get into the season, the people that you're going to deal with most outside of the coaches are like, Corey Campbell, Kristen Coggan. There's consistency there. And those are like, they matter to the players. Like, we don't talk about them as much, but the players do. And those are a couple of names that come up. Like, if you have a deeper conversation with just about any player on the roster about like the inner workings of Nebraska football and like why they have confidence in the program to build, like those two names are going to come up, and they've been there all the way through. So when you have that kind of consistency from the head coach on down, and there are, quite a few players, college football has turnover, but there are quite a few players who have been there through the whole thing. It doesn't surprise me that like that comfort level and just like that understanding of how things are supposed to look and go at this time of year and all times of year is higher right now than it has been in the past too.
That's our guy, Mitch Sherman from The Athletic. Mitch, we appreciate the time as always, and we'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks a lot, guys.